There we go. All right, great. So let me start by saying welcome to all of our attendees and thank you to all of our panelists who are here with us today. Recognizing that it is summer and it's 3:30 in the afternoon on a Thursday, we are even more grateful that you've carved out some time to be here with us to talk about some really important things. I'll go over in a moment. Well, our protocol today will be that I'll be running through the operations guide at a high level, hitting some of the points that we think really are the key points and trying to anticipate some of the questions that you may have. Then after that, we'll go into a question and answer period using the Q&A feature here on the webinar. And one of the great things about going on Thursday instead of going on Tuesday for Saxe is we've gotten a little better with this system to understand how the upvoting works. So what we'll ask is when we go into the question and answer period, feel free to type in your question, but also maybe before you do, take a look to see what questions are already there. And there's an option for you to be able to upvote a question. And what that does is raise it to the top or near the top of our list of questions so that we can try to get to those that are most widely held across the board. Also, I don't want anyone to be worried if we're not able to answer all of the questions because we will be putting together an FAQ, a frequently asked questions document that's on our website. We're going to be pulling the questions from the Zoom here prior to closing it down, putting it together into that FAQ and having that linked onto our website. As you know, this is an evolving situation. We continue to learn and to adapt based on what we've newly learned. So we want to make sure we're answering as many of your questions as we can along the way. My last request is my intro, and then I'm going to stop and allow everyone here on the call to just say a brief hello. I see we have 5 questions or so already. Please don't ask questions now. Wait until we get to that period of time in the session, because what happened the last couple of times was that people were asking questions as I was talking, and then we didn't know if the question was because more clarification was needed for something I discussed, or if the question was asked prior to me discussing it. So if you wait until after I'm done and we say, please put in your questions, then we know that those are all questions that were not already addressed. It just helps us so that we don't wind up repeating things that folks really aren't that interested in knowing. We want to make this session as relevant for you as possible. One last thing, I apologize, is that we are recording the session, and after it goes through and renders and is ready to go for the website, we'll have a link on the Charting Our Course website for this session in place of the link that you used as the invite to come on in. So going to that website, you'll see a YouTube link will be there, and it will have this session for anything that you want to go back to and to refresh your memory or what have you. So with that, why don't we just say our brief introductions, and we'll start with Dr. Krenti.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Jill Krenti. I'm the Deputy Superintendent.
Good afternoon. Welcome. I'm Darlene Pianka, the Director of Human Resources.
I'm muted. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bill Tesber, Assistant Superintendent for Pupil and Family Services.
And Dave?
Good afternoon, everybody. Dave Gussich, Principal of Saxe Middle School. Thank you for being here.
Good afternoon to our Saxe parents. This is Julie Ferreira, one of the assistant principals.
Good afternoon, parents. Steve Bedard, assistant principal. Tell your kids I said hello and I miss them and can't wait to see them.
Oh, it's nice, Mr. Bedard. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Steve Clapp, assistant principal.
I miss them too, as does Dave. We just wanted to make that clear.
We all do. And we're grateful to our board members who have been joining us really all week long. So at this point, if I forget anything, you can certainly jump in and remind me. So we'll start with our board chair here.
Hi, everyone. Katrina Parkhill, Board of Education.
Everyone, Deanna Carlson, Board of Education.
Hi, Julie Reeves, Board of Education.
Great. So thank you all again for being here. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our now 312 attendees who are here. We look forward to an interactive session. As you can imagine, an interactive session virtually with over 300 people can be a challenge. So again, we'll capture the questions answered and unanswered and work to put those together into our FAQ. But obviously, a lot of interest here, so let's dive right in and begin with our overview. I'm going to share my screen. And as I'm doing that, I'm also going to remind folks that while we spend an awful lot of time on Zoom, we're not experts in it. So we're going to do our best to make everything work as best it can for everybody, visually as we talk this through. So panelists, can we see that okay?
Yes.
Excellent. So on Friday, we turned into the state and shared with staff across the board what we're calling our COVID operations plan. And then on Sunday, I sent around an email to the community with a link to our website called Charting Our Course that has this plan, plus other information and resources and things that we hope would be helpful for you. The state has required us, and if you've had a chance to read through the guide, you'll see quite a bit of it is our response to requirements from the state and how we're going to be approaching things. But really, the state's guidance to us was about putting together a reopening plan. And we didn't like that phraseology or terminology, reopening, because it seems like an event. And so as we've thought about this and put this all together, we came to realize very quickly that we're not creating a plan for day one. We're creating a plan to operate in a COVID environment. And so we wanted to make sure the system that we developed and the plan we put in place would work throughout the course of the year, not just on the first day of school. First day is important, but equally important is the 5th and the 10th and the 30th and the 100th and the 150th. As long as we need to operate differently because of the pandemic, we need to have clearly articulated programs, processes, and goals. And so we renamed our plan. We didn't call it a reopening guide. We called it an operations plan. And we also are keeping it in draft. This is not the kind of thing that you laminate, put on the shelf, and then just go do what you normally do. This is a guide that we're going to be using throughout. It's a living document. We're going to be adding to it. We've already have multiple appendices in here that provide more detailed information about things. I anticipate including in here things like Board of Education's looking at the calendar, looking at maybe changing some policies in the future. As this continues to unfold and evolve, this will become a resource, as will that website. And again, the logic and thinking behind the website was to create a place where when you are ready to learn about what's going on, you can go to that website and kind of click through communications, click through resources and updates and what have you. I'll continue to send out email blasts, but also recognize that, folks, it's a summer, right? And people aren't always checking their email all the time. And sometimes we're traveling and doing other things. So wanted to set up a system where the information is ready and available for you when you're looking for it. So that's where the website is. And we're working hard to keep that as current and updated as we can. As a matter of fact, the meetings that we had yesterday with East parents and guardians and South parents and guardians, those meetings are already on there. So they're already on the website, and you can pull those up and live stream them as well. So we're working hard to keep it current. We're going to continue that because we also know we're in a global pandemic. The information changes very quickly, and we need to stay nimble in our decision-making and in our communications, and we're going to do that. So in our operations plan, just want to make a quick point on this. I've looked at many of our surrounding districts and many of my colleagues' plans, and they've all done a very good job. And they all have a very nice picture of their district logo on the front. And as we put this together, we've got a wonderful logo in New Canaan, but we would much rather lead with kids, because that is what guides us in our thinking and our approach and what we're doing here. I said this on Monday at the governor's press conference. I believe it, I know it. Nobody wants our kids back to school more than we do. We miss them. This is what we've dedicated our lives to doing. But we're only going to do that in the safest, most reasonable way, in a very thoughtful approach. And that's what this guide is all about. We wanted to create a system that's flexible, that can adjust to changing conditions, and that's truly centered on the health, safety, and well-being of our students, of our staff, and the entire community. And because of that, we've had to make some hard decisions. As we talk through this a little bit, you'll notice what some of those decisions are, but always guided by what's right for the health, safety, and wellness of all of us. Because that's truly, by keeping that in the center, will not only do well today, navigating all of the challenges that are in front of us, but it helps prepare us for the future. It helps us stay safe and healthy each and every day. So I mentioned that is our highest priority, and it is. And certainly you see, I'm not going to read to you. You have the guide, it's available online, and you're welcome to go through, provide feedback, whatever you like, along the way. But we are focused on making decisions, health and wellness and safety. We also are developing within that a system to continue to deliver high quality instruction to all of our kids regardless of the modality that we're in. And I'm going to talk about modality in a moment. But this, we keep these ideas, these values and beliefs as our center. And then regardless of what comes, we consistently make decisions that are really, truly predictable, which is what we want. We want people to understand what and why, what we believe, who we are, and why we make the decisions we make. So I'm going to begin here with the best practices mitigation strategies. These come from the state's guide. The state published a couple of weeks ago a reopening guide, they called it. And in that guide, they had recommendations and they had requirements. And in there, they talked about mitigation strategies. We then, of course, did further research on our own to look at CDC, look at AAP, look at other places in order to fully understand what each of these means in order to successfully apply them into all of our classrooms and all of our schools. The guiding principle behind the mitigation strategies is that there's no one thing that anyone can do to defeat the virus right now. We're all hoping that that a vaccine comes. Even a vaccine takes time to build the herd immunity that we need in order to be in a different place. There's no one silver bullet. What will really determine how we do is the cumulative impact of our collective efforts. And so as we look at these mitigation strategies, it's a list of smallish things we can all do that will create a cumulative positive effect and help us all to stay healthy. So the first here is cohorting. You've probably heard cohorting in the news and different things. Simply what that means is taking a school and breaking it into the smallest possible unit. So as we think about our schools, we then think about our grade levels. And then within the grade levels, we think about our teams, whether it's a 2-person team at the 5th grade or a 4-person team in the grade levels. And we believe that those teams are the best unit to use as a cohort unit. The research around cohorting comes from, a lot of it from Europe, some from Asia, places that have managed the virus and the spread well. And the guiding sort of philosophy or approach is that by cohorting, you're able to identify, isolate, and contain any issues with the virus that you might have. So if there's a positive case within a cohort, that cohort then would be removed, quarantined, isolated for a period of time. And then after the 14 days is still, if that's still the guide as we go back in August 31st, then it would be that the number of days, then they'd all come back, right? But it means that a positive case doesn't shut down a school or a district. It impacts that cohort directly. It also means that cohort can continue its instruction, but in a remote learning environment for that period of time of quarantine. Again, I'm going to get into the details of that in a moment, but cohorting gives you that, it creates that smaller unit. And it is all about identifying, isolating, and containing so that not just does it protect that cohort, but everybody else, both in the school and in the community. So as we put these cohorts together, and we go through these mitigation strategies, they're not just important in school, they're important outside of school as well, especially these other strategies I'm about to talk about. The next is social distancing. It's a term probably none of us were really familiar with prior to March, and now we all could probably define it to anybody else. We know what this means now. It's a part of our lives. Initially, CDC talked about 6 feet for social distancing, and they still use that as a guide. The American Academy of Pediatrics, AAP, talks about 3 feet in a school setting. And for us and in the governor's guide, the guidance really was about doing your best in recognition of the fact that school buildings were designed as collaborative learning spaces. And now we're looking at each space and figuring out how to retrofit it to become a space that promotes sort of distancing, right? So that's very different. Our schools were looking to use the classroom spaces and the other spaces differently. So we look to say, 3 feet when you can, 6 is even better, but understanding that there may be times where not. Now this is where these strategies all work together because they are complementary of one another. The cohorting and the social distancing and the face coverings, all of this, the hand washing, all of it works together to build a system. They're complementary. So where you can't socially distance, for instance, then the mask wearing becomes even more important. And in the governor's guide, it is required that all students and adults in a school building will be wearing their masks. And with that, we've looked at our program and our facilities, and we're looking at ways, how do we build in mask breaks to our programs? What do those look like? How can we use the outdoor spaces to our advantage? We're purchasing tents. We are looking at our courtyards. We're looking at how best can we use the outdoors, because we also know that the spread is reduced significantly by being outdoors. So we're looking at those, and how can we create instructional spaces out there? So if you go by some of our schools, you'll see some larger wedding-like tents up there. We're not renting out our space as wedding venues. We're setting them up as instructional places. So we're working through all of that. We're looking at our Wi-Fi, making sure the Wi-Fi outdoors is robust enough so that we can teach classes outside. So all of that is a part of the our efforts here. But face covering, social distancing, cohorting all work together, along with something that we've been told probably since we remember being told anything to do as often as possible, which is washing our hands, right? This is old-fashioned approach, probably one of, if not the most important things, and something we can all do. And it's funny, we all think we know how to wash our hands, but there's science behind the guidance that we get around washing your hands for 20 seconds or more. And it's about how the active ingredient in soap can break down the cellular membrane in a virus and make it safe. So we'll be teaching these things and more to our kids as they come back. A little bit later, I'll talk about our onboarding plan. But again, the layering of these strategies together. And something that's very important, and for our staff, for our kids, for everybody, is staying home if you're not feeling well. And as we built our system, thought about what would remote learning look like, face-to-face learning, hybrid learning, how does it all work? We wanted to build a system that promoted this, where students, if they're not feeling well, can stay home for a day or two and still be connected to their class and be able to keep up with what's going on. So when we get into the model, you'll see how that works. But we understand that, looking at the list of symptoms, these are very common symptoms, right? A fever, sore throat, so a runny nose, congestion. We're going into allergy season, and runny nose and congestion pretty much defines me from October through, through November for sure. So these are common symptoms that could apply in lots of ways, but we want people to be aware of how they're feeling, and we want them to be comfortable stepping out for a day or two until they do feel better. And so the system is designed to help with that. Truly, we're all in this together. And I believe for sure, that our success in implementing these layered mitigation strategies will directly determine our success in bringing our kids back, and how well and for how long they can be in our schools. So we are committed to all of these, and we'll get into a little more detail later. I'm glad to answer any questions. So I've talked about modalities of instruction, and what we're thinking about and talking about there is dependent upon the level of community spread. And by that, and we talked about a low community spread, moderate, or high community spread. Literally just an hour or so ago, the state sent out some guidelines around how to identify level of community spread. And at 4 o'clock today, the governor has a press conference where I'm sure he's going to be talking about it. So when we're done, I'll jump onto that and start it from the beginning and see what else is new. These press conferences sometimes come with some surprises, so I'll be sure to watch that and continue to update our plan. But the level of community spread is determined by a series of public health metrics and indicators, and low, moderate, high, yellow, orange, red will determine sort of the capacity in our buildings, and the capacity in our buildings will help to inform the modality of our teaching. Okay, so the model that we've developed and continue to refine really looks to be fact-based in its identification of the modality. So we need these public health related indicators, which give us a high level. And then underneath that, we're developing our own heuristics around what do we do if there is a positive case? What do we do if? And all of the different scenarios. And I'm working with really experts in their field, and certainly our local health department, Dr. Pierce, who's connected with the Norwalk Hospital and the New Balance Health Network. We've got and he's our district medical advisor. Dr. Reed, who's connected with Stanford Hospital, is the town's district health advisor. So these experts, along with state experts, Dr. Carter, the state epidemiologist from Yale, UConn Health, Department of Public Health at the state level, State Department of Ed, we're lucky, I think, enough to be connected with all of them directly. and be able to get them on the phone, have a conversation with them, and continue to learn together. So our decisions around this will be fact-based. The model itself has to be fluid because, as you'll see in a bit, regardless of modality, we're essentially in all three simultaneously. And that it's important to have that fluidity for students to be able to move in and out of the different learning styles based on their own individual circumstances. And I'll explain that. Flexible in that what we say we're going to do today continues to evolve because we do believe in continuous improvement. That is a core value as a district. And we also know that we know what we know when we're problem solving for that. We're identifying things that we hadn't thought of and problem solving for those. But as in all things, until you implement it, you don't know what you don't know. And so we're going to continue learning and improving as we work through the model. And it needs to be, and it is flexible enough to grow with us as we go. And it needs to be fast, meaning that we need to be able to quickly move between these modalities. If we start to see trends that indicate that the conditions are deteriorating, the rapidity with which we can get to a new modality and do it successfully, I believe will directly influence our community's health. If we see that we're going into a moderate community spread, we need to be able to quickly move into that modality so that we can reduce our numbers, increase the strength of our mitigation strategies, and help to contain what's going on. So we have to be able to do that quickly. And I think that we gave a good example of that, I think, back in March, where we had prepared, and on March 11th, before the rest of the state, we'd closed because we do believe, and of course, that we've said this always, and it's an opportunity to highlight it, that the health and safety of our kids comes first. And we saw what was going on, we saw the trend, and we closed our schools to keep everyone safe. Within 48 hours, we closed on the 11th. That Friday morning, we began our distance learning program. That was because we were prepared. We didn't want kids to go without. We wanted to get right into it. And so as we think about the year ahead and our need to potentially move in and out of modalities, we want to make sure that we do that as smoothly and quickly and well as possible so that we don't lose our stride with our kids and our kids stay connected to all of what they're doing. So each of these different levels, the yellow, orange, red, low, moderate, high, comes with their own set of conditions. So in a low community spread environment, our schools are open at 100% capacity. Our buses are running at typical capacity. We're using all the mitigation strategies, and we've increased our cleaning and sanitation protocols. In a moderate community spread environment, we're now reducing our capacity in the buildings to 50%. And I'll get into the details about that in a moment. We're prioritizing access to school every day for our most vulnerable learners. So those that need to access their own specific services, they may be able to come in every day. But by reducing the number to around 50% in our schools, then our buses, of course, are running on reduced capacities. And we have reconfigured the routes so that a student may be on a different bus if we go into a hybrid mode, because those buses have been balanced out based on that. Of course, all of the mitigation strategies, keeping with the cleaning, and it's at that point we've got to take another close look at all of our extracurricular activities to make determinations about what's happening, what's not. If the unfortunate thing happens and we have to move into a high community spread environment, then we are closing our classrooms to students again, where there's no more transportation, and we're on full remote learning. We may have a few students coming in again who need to access their resources and their services in person. You may find teachers are actually able to teach their classes from their classroom. We learned a lot since March, not just about education schools, but also about the virus. So we know that if we do go into that mode, we can have some limited access in a carefully controlled environment if teachers want to teach from their classroom. Maybe they want to use resources there, their whiteboard or what have you. But I'll get a few more details around that. But it is likely if we're in the red, we may be under home isolation orders from the governor as well, as we were back in the spring. So going a level deeper, in the yellow, the full low community spread, schools fully open. That's, again, all the mitigation strategies are in place. If we were to open tomorrow, given the good metrics that we're experiencing in Connecticut, we would be in this low community spread environment, we believe. What it is our doors are open to all of our students, and everyone is welcome to come on in for face-to-face instruction in the classroom. We're still applying all of the mitigation strategies that I mentioned, but schools are open as we know them. A big difference this year, education remains compulsory for children, right? And that's been that way for a long time. Attendance, however, in the building is not compulsory. What the governor and part of the plan and the plan we put together here permits is for families to opt into remote learning exclusively. So as we go through the plan and as you have a chance to talk about it with your family and think about that decision, there is the option to choose for remote learning for the first semester. Now we're a public school, and what they found over in Europe and in Asia and places that are doing a good job containing the virus, that folks that initially opt for remote learning, within a couple of weeks, most of them wind up coming back into the classroom. So we have to have the fluidity in the model so that folks are able to do that. And that's one of the reasons we've set it up to be a live streaming of the classroom model, meaning that our teachers will be trained in how to live stream their class so that they are simultaneously teaching face-to-face and interacting and engaging with the students via Zoom, on a remote call. That doesn't mean students are going to be staring at a screen for 6 hours, any more than it means students in a classroom are staring at a teacher for 6 hours, right? So there'll be craft lessons and direct instruction that's involved, and then students at home may be instructed to turn off their cameras, to close their laptop, whatever it is, and do some work on their own. Or they might be in a group where virtually they be put together in a group by the teacher to do some other collaborative work, and then the teacher may have them check back in at a given time, or ask, talk to them, or what have you virtually. So it's something that we are working out the finer details, but it's a model that we believe will work well, because it will accommodate our students on remote learning, but it also reduces the friction for students who don't feel well and need to stay home for a day or two. They can log right into the live stream from home. They're not missing out, and they can work to keep up with the class. It also works for students who may, because of their individual circumstances, may need to quarantine. For instance, if a parent tests positive, an individual student may need to quarantine for a period of time based on that information. The student's cohort wouldn't have to, because they're once removed from the positive case, but the individual would. So that person, that student would log right into the live stream each day and continue to participate. Our program works in that the students on remote are following the same schedule as the students who are doing face-to-face. So in the morning, first period, students will be logging in, will be taking attendance. They'll be following along throughout the day. Of course, during lunch, they wouldn't be logged in, but they would be expected to attend simultaneously with the students who are there for face-to-face instruction. So again, this model is meant to accommodate students who select remote, but also those who, for short-term or slightly longer term, need to go into the remote learning and then come right back. So it has that maximum flexibility, and we believe that's the right thing for our kids. You see the participation. A complement to this system, and one of the reasons we're confident in what we're developing, is the use of a learning management system. And so we used Google Classroom as we were working through last year. And what we've done is over the summer developed training and more robust understanding of Google Classroom and what it's able to do as a learning management system. We're going to continue learning about that. So the live streaming complemented by an LMS, and we'll be using Google Classroom, we believe creates that blended learning experience for kids that will help them to continue in their education and be successful here. So let me move on. So if we do hit a moderate community spread, or feel that this is the right modality for school for one of several reasons, then what we're talking about is a hybrid, right? You've heard about hybrids. People are saying we want a hybrid. Well, there is no one hybrid. The hybrid that we're developing here in New Canaan takes our entire student body, about 4,200 kids, and splits them in half, which is 50% A through K, 50% L through Z. And we purposely did it by family across the district because we want to keep families together. So there may be a few folks who kids have different last names or whatever. We'll ferret all of that out, make sure we get all the information to keep families together, because we know that if you've got children at elementary, middle, and high school, you'd want them to all have the same day and be on the same schedule so that they can support one another in the home. So splitting it 50-50, the way it works would be the cohort X, 50%, would come in for face-to-face live instruction on the first day, while cohort Y would not come into the building and would participate in the remote learning program on the first day. So we split it in half. By splitting it in half, we strengthen the mitigation strategies, social distancing, we reduce the number of kids in the building, reduce the number of kids in the cafeteria and different places, and it creates a smaller cohort. So day one, cohort X comes in for face-to-face, cohort Y stays home for remote learning. And of course, the students who self-select in the remote learning program do that every day, regardless. On day two, cohort Y comes in for face-to-face and cohort X stays home and participates in remote learning. And it just alternates. And we use day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 because it just keeps going. And it might start on a Wednesday with day 1. So we didn't want to do Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So that's the only reason we did it that way. And it just continues out. It alternates 50% of the time, it goes through. The learning management system is still used. Again, we may have some students who come in every day based on their individual learning needs if their services need to be provided, face-to-face. And we continue stressing those mitigation strategies. So if we move into a high community spread environment, that's when our schools are closed for instruction. And if that occurs, then our teachers, as we said, are teaching remotely, kids are learning remotely. I want to be sure that I say this clearly, that we have learned so much since this began in March, not just about the virus and all, but about delivering instruction virtually and remotely. So it would be a different experience, I believe, for our kids, for our families. We recognize our youngest learners certainly struggled the most, I think, the K-1-2, and we've developed a system around that using a learning management system appropriate for their age. But it's hard in middle school and everywhere else. So we've been working really, really hard to develop a system and develop our own expertise around the use of those systems to continually improve in this environment as well. Again, as I mentioned before, it's likely if we're at this level that home isolation orders may be in effect. And as we teach our students the mitigation strategies, we hope that they don't just do them 6.5 hours a day. We really hope that they learn to incorporate hand washing and social distancing, all of these strategies into their daily lives, because we know that just like the virus doesn't know state boundaries, it's vigilance 24 hours a day will help all of us to stay healthy. Now, we talked in the beginning about how much we miss our students, and we do. And it's stunning to think that we haven't had them in our schools since March. It's a long time for students to be out of school. So we thought long and hard about how should we best bring them back. We don't want to just say, hey, welcome back, first day of school, everybody in. They're not only have they been out of school for a little while, but it's going to look different. It's going to feel a little different for them as they get back into it. Now, we know kids are resilient and have no doubt that once we go through what the instruction and give them time to practice, that they will be able to manage all of what we're talking about. But we want to make sure that we build in time for for the kids to learn and practice what they need to know. So our onboarding plan, it begins with our faculty. We've added a few days around professional learning, moved them around so staff can come in for a full week prior to the start of the school year. And then on Monday, August 31st was our first day of school in the calendar. And what we're doing is changing it a bit so that on Monday the 31st, we're bringing in 50% of our kids. Essentially, cohort X is coming in. Cohort Y is getting another day of summer vacation. The next day, September 1st, cohort Y is coming in, and cohort X gets another day of summer vacation. Same thing happens on the 2nd and the 3rd, X and then Y. And we're doing that for a variety of reasons. One is to teach, give our kids a chance to practice. It's also so that we get to know the kids a little bit better. Having half your kids in front of you gives you an opportunity to really get to know them on a deeper level and give them a chance to get to know each other a little bit, reconnect with each other, start forming those relationships that we know are so crucial to learning across the board. So those 4 days, we think they're going to be incredibly valuable in helping students to onboard back into school, re-engage with each other and with learning. And then on Friday, we would bring everybody back to 100% capacity. And if students have selected into remote learning and other things, that's where they would be logging in and participating as the remote learners. So this onboarding plan is really meant to provide us with the time. The schedule and the other details are all getting worked out. But if you're a family last name A, you would expect to participate on Monday, the 31st, on Wednesday, the 2nd, and then go in with everybody else on the 4th. Okay, if your last name starts with Z, you would go in on Tuesday, you'd go in on Thursday, and then go in on Friday and on. Okay, it gives us a chance to really see how things are going to work as far as buses and drop off and pick up at the beginning and the end of the day, movement around the building, and it gives us half the students there to do it. Schools, like we said, going to be a little different, so we want to make sure everyone's comfortable with it as we transition back in. So I mentioned the cohorting and the philosophy and the ideas behind it. In the 5th grade with the 2 teacher teams and the 4-person teams at the 6, 7, 8, it does pose some problems, of course. You know, we're looking at pushing in instead of traveling to, meaning that many of our unified arts are specials. Instead of having kids going to the art room, going to the music room, going here, going there, the teacher will come to them. And again, the cohorting is an important strategy, but it's only one. So we also look at social distancing and masks and other things. So we'll have teachers who are traveling to the kids. We're also using outdoor spaces where it makes sense. We've got lots of beautiful courtyards over at Saxe, wonderful fields outside. So I know the administrative team has been looking at that and seeing what are the best spaces to use and how can we manage that. We're looking at different flows for our cafeteria. We may be using a gym for some lunch waves so that we reduce where instead of having a whole grade level in the cafeteria at a time, we may have a team. If we have 2 teams, we'll make sure that they're separated enough following CDC guidelines to maintain the fidelity of the cohort. Same goes in the gym. You know, we're looking at all of those things. Minimizing hallway travel, doing those. Transportation. So students will be expected to wear a mask on the bus. And that's an important requirement in the state's guidelines. We'll be opening the windows on the buses as long as it's not pouring rain. We'll be doing other things to keep those buses as clean as they can. We are going to be sending out a survey next week to families to ask around anticipated transportation needs and anticipated modality, right? That again, education is compulsory, but attendance in building is not. So people will have the ability to opt into remote learning. And we want to get a sense of how many people that may be for our planning as we look forward. We're looking at how best to facilitate the pickups and the drop-offs. That's going to be a challenge. So we'll have to ask your patience with that as we begin. But I've been talking with the New Canaan Police Department, and Captain DeFederico has assured me that he and his crew stand ready to jump in and help us out for the first couple of weeks as we learn these new traffic patterns and the new flow. Saxe has the good fortune of having the upper and lower division and some good traffic flow right through. So things may be different next year, but we'll have them figured out. Again, some of the rules around this, students not changing their seats, things like that. And the first 4 days running at 50% capacity, which we think will be beneficial. Back quickly to the use of face coverings, masks, and shields. The mask is required for students and adults while in the building. However, we recognize that we're going to need mask breaks. So we've also invested in face shields, and that may be an option for a break when social distancing can be maintained for students to be able to take breaks. The guidelines from the state do say that teachers who are socially distant may remove their mask in order to instruct. In that instance, again, we may be using face shields as an added layer of protection to be sure that we manage this as best as we can. We've also purchased clear plastic barriers. We're installing those. We've gotten sheets of plexiglass and other things, and actually our maintenance crew is fabricating them down right at the high school using the shop there, cutting them down and using them in many places. And because again, we know that learning is often social, so we don't want to set up a system where kids are expected to just sit alone at their desks all day long. So what can we do so students can collaboratively work? Part of that is using some physical barriers, layering on the mask, and allowing students to get, to be closer than the 3 feet and socially distanced and able to work together successfully. So we're, again, layering these things on in order to make it all work, keeping our goal squarely in mind. I mean, we're here to educate kids, right? Keep them safe, keep them healthy, but we want to make sure that the program that we have is successful in educating our students. So question around when do we cancel classes, go to remote learning, when do we reopen? This is all going to be guided at a macro level by the state guidance and recommendations, and at a micro level by me and the Department of Public Health and our district doctor and town medical advisor, and all of us working together. I know the expertise in our area is immense, and we are very well tapped into it and talking with them and learning from them. So that's all of us will be working together to do that. Excuse me. And of course, guided by the CDC and their recommendations. You know, one of the problems in the spring when we closed was we didn't have clear guidance about when could we reopen. So we're also articulating that and making sure that that is very clear. I mentioned briefly the quarantining rules and how all of that works. Again, guided by the CDC. It can change. You know, as we know, again, we're in a global pandemic. We have to stay nimble and stay current in our information. But as it stands now, they look at close contact would require quarantining, which means within 6 feet of someone who's positive for at least 15 minutes. Okay, so with that, we think about in a school how that could look, and why this is why the cohorting becomes so important. But it's that direct connection. It's once removed. It's not twice removed. Often people ask, well, if there's a student, you know, a student in my class whose brother tests positive, does that my whole cohort have to go out? And it doesn't. That student does, likely, because he or she may have had close contact with a positive case. But the fact that the cohort had contact with someone who had contact, so they're removed from the positive case, they don't have to quarantine. Now, if that child does wind up testing positive, that's different. And that's where the cohort model would be implemented. But we're guided by the facts, by the science, by logic here in our decision-making, which, again, is thanks to the really, really great work of all of the medical professionals right in our region. And I think, Dr. Crenti, I'm going to catch my breath and say thank you for everyone's patience as I tried to go through a lot of information. But what we'll do now is open up for questions and answers. And again, I urge you to take a look at the questions that have already been asked and to upvote if it's similar to yours, so that it sort of rises to the top for us. I think there's a couple in chat, but I'd ask you, if you have put it in chat, to actually put it into the Q&A so that we can do that upvoting. Again, and just while they're doing this, I'm looking at the chats here, I just want folks to know that, again, it's the layering of mitigation strategies that matters. So it is the mask wearing and the social distancing and the cohorting and the hand washing and all of those things that are complementary of one another that will hopefully have that positive cumulative impact for us. So I'm going to stop the share.
And Dr. Lutzy, we're going to let you get a drink of water, and I'm going to ask Bianca to answer the first question. And that is, many parents have had the opportunity to read the survey that was sent out to the Connecticut Education Association, talking about some of the fears that educators have about returning to school. So Mrs. Bianca, if you could respond on what percentage of New Canaan public school teachers want to return to full-time and school learning, and could the teachers impact the return to school plan?
Sure. At this point, I don't have a percentage to offer, but what I would say in a very reassuring way is that we are holding these meetings with our staff as well. We've given them a lot of information. We have answered many questions. We are working very closely with our teachers union president and vice president. And at this point, only a very small number of teachers have made contact with me. And typically those situations are regarding a serious medical issue of concern. And they're a very small number.
Thank you. Dr. Gussich, can you speak about how team and cohorts will be determined? How will they be placing students onto a team, and then maybe integrate in how we'll keep those teams separate at recess and lunch?
Certainly. So thank you for that question. While it's something that we would typically have done at this point in the summer, we were being very thoughtful in terms of how we're processing that. So it is still very much in process, but once we get our teams in place, we have the structure there. We had some outline questions that we wanted to certainly take into account, but we're doing this as heterogeneously as possible. So once we have those peer cohorts established, we have our students within those teams. So they'll remain with those core classes. And then we're going to figure out the best way possible to ensure that the quality instruction takes place with all of their classes. And that's going to allow us to plan for the rest of the day. So for example, going to lunch, like Dr. Lutzy alluded to, We're going to go through different waves, and the same thing with recess. We've also taken a look, as was mentioned as well, our entire campus, which we're so fortunate to have such a expansive area with the outdoor fields and the courtyards, to have designated areas for our teams to have for either outdoor time and or recess time and or during those lunch waves, which is going to allow us to keep that spacing in effect during those times. So we're going to be very strategic in terms of any transitions between classes. So with the teams being so close, there aren't going to be any crossing or very minimal, I should say. So those cores are going to be changing classes right in between within team. And then when they go to the other areas, such as the lunchroom and or to recess, it's going to be done very structured with a teacher with direct supervision throughout. So it's definitely going to look a little bit different, and that's going to be part of our onboarding process as we return, and we'll get the kids up to speed with it. But we're going to make it a warm, welcome environment, even with those restrictions in place. So
great. Dr. Lutzy, I know that you talked a lot about movement between the modalities, but if you could talk a little bit about what might make a decision for one district to start in a hybrid and our district to start at full capacity, if you could maybe emphasize that a little bit more.
Yeah, that's a great question. And this has been a big conversation with superintendents around the state. Because essentially the state is putting together those metrics, and I'm fortunate to be representing superintendents in this committee with Yale epidemiologists, Department of Public Health, environmental scientists, others. So we've had one meeting, we have another one on Monday, and we're going to continue working through those high level indicators. But another level of consideration is the success with which individual schools can implement the mitigation strategies. So we have the good fortune of having relatively updated buildings and HVAC systems and others that we're working within. There certainly are some places where class sizes run at 30. And they're saying that there's, with 30 students in a room, in a smaller room, even 3 feet is impossible. And, they can't envision being able to implement the mitigation strategies as successfully as we're talking about. So it is determined by that level of community spread, but also that level of sort of individual consideration by district. So you will see variation. I have no doubt that you'll see some districts that are ready to bring all the students back in. Some that open in a hybrid, and you may even have some that open in remote based upon their individual circumstance. So we've been working really hard to look at how best to implement those mitigation strategies. And I think we're well positioned.
Great. There are some questions in regards to, will we be able to announce the teams and the classes earlier than in the past. And unfortunately, I think we're going to need to stick with our guidelines because we're watching enrollment very carefully. And when the enrollment is spiking, we are putting in additional teachers to bring down the class sizes. And so we don't want to release something early and then determine that we're going to add an additional teacher to help reduce class sizes. And I think one of the other questions is a great question, and I'll start and then maybe one of the Saxe administrators would like to join in. But there's really about how do you make all those connections at the beginning of the year. And what was a lot easier for students when we went out in March was they already had such great connections with their teachers and with their classmates, and they could really rely on one another. And how do we go in quickly and make those connections, not only with their teachers, but also with their fellow classmates. And certainly I think the model of starting on a hybrid is going to allow us to do that, bring students back. We're planning on doing a lot of team building activities at the beginning. The state actually released a document called Sensible Assessment, which really talks about those first units of study and making sure that kids feel very successful with their first unit of study, but also to help build those relationships with their teachers and with their classmates. So if there's a Saxe administrator that also wants to elaborate, by all means, go right ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Correnti. And you really captured the essence of, our planning and our thinking. And that's really, this has been a question that's been there since the spring when we went out. While maintaining those relationships, people were looking ahead, well, how are we going to establish relationships in a different format? So that's been a big part of our conversation all throughout, not just locally, but, nationally, that people have really taken a look at how we're going to do that. And that is going to be a focus for us. We've taken a look at our schedule and in having opportunities that we can rearrange a couple things to establish our time throughout the day to be able to make those connections, and making sure any transitions that we may have, are really refined in terms of allowing us to utilize that time for those relationships and connections and activities and team building, like Dr. Correnti said. So, it's definitely a priority, focus, and emphasis for us. And, while we're still, nailing down what it's going to look like specifically, we're going to be proud of what we're going to be able to provide, because we know that when people come back, our entire staff knows that as well, that's a #1 priority for us. So I don't know if any of the rest of the admin team wants to jump in on anything that we've talked about.
I would just add there, Dave, that our timing almost couldn't be better to have worked so hard with this Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence on the Ruler program, and to have had that training and had a year under our belt, really a couple of years under our belt of that work. So hopefully that work is really going to pay off as we dive into the emotional intelligence part and the Ruler aspects and those anchor tools that we've been implementing for the last 2 years. I think that's going to be a big part of how we can be responsive to the needs of the teachers and the students.
There's questions coming up about lockers. So if one of you of the administrators would like to describe how you might be approaching lockers in the upcoming school year.
Sure, that's also an ongoing conversation. I've been speaking with colleagues around Fairfield County, and how we're going to be approaching that, and obviously specific to Saxe. We haven't determined yet whether it's going to be something, a final answer, using lockers, not using lockers. At this point, we recognize people have to bring things to school. As I look out my window right now, we just had a severe thunderstorm warning. We're going to have to navigate those things where kids are going to have, maybe a raincoat or an umbrella. So, but we do also recognize that is an area where it is a high congregation area. So we're going to try and minimize what that might look like. So whether they come in, are able to put their items away, which are right outside their first classroom that they're reporting to immediately. But we know we're not going to have transition times like we typically did, 7 or 8 transitions where kids are going to their lockers every period and changing things out. That's not going to be the case. So we're going to be working very closely with our teachers within their team and having staggered times to be able to access the lockers when necessary. And it's going to be maybe a couple times throughout the day if that's what we end up going with. And then obviously they'll be able to get their belongings before they leave for the day. Ultimately, our hope is that when they leave for the day, there's not going to be anything left in there that they may need. And we're going to be prepared to, report for any situation on any given day. So that's going to be our thinking as we approach it.
Great. There are questions that are coming up about the live stream. So part of the professional learning that the teachers will take place in is they'll be learning how to navigate the live stream as a teacher, but they'll also be learning how to navigate the live stream as a student. And part of the experience those first 4 days will be teaching the students how to utilize that live stream. We're also hoping to schedule a few parent workshops so that parents can understand our learning management system, how to get into Google Classroom and how to understand Google Classroom, but then also to understand that live stream piece so that if they need to help their child with that, they'll be able to do so. And the live stream is meant to be fluid. So they may be listening to a mini lesson that a teacher is given, and then the teacher may be asking the kids to go off and do something independent. And the kids who are on the live stream may actually log out and go do their independent work and then come back in to participate in the class discussion. There were questions about will students have interaction? Will they be able to ask questions through the live stream? All of those, we do have the capabilities to do that, and the teacher will be setting up guidelines. They may stop in the middle of a mini lesson and say, those of you that are at home, do you have any questions for us? So that they'll learn how to do that. That's our part of the professional learning that we'll be doing with the staff. Brian, there still continues to be some questions about the maintaining of the 3 feet and the social distance, and will we be putting plexiglass between every desk, and how can we possibly get the 6 feet? So perhaps maybe we need to clarify that a little bit.
Sure. So really it's around maximizing social distancing as much as we can. So we have asked our staff to take home any of their personal belongings that they've had in the rooms, because that, over time those things can accumulate and they bring in materials and other things, file cabinets, what have you. We're moving out other furniture and other things from the rooms in order to really maximize the available space for kids. And there are some where we can get to the, somewhere between 3 and 6, and somewhere we're going to be at, at 3. We're not putting up physical barriers around every kid and every desk. We don't think that that's a good move for a variety of reasons, including the social emotional piece. What we are looking to do, again, the layering those strategies. So when students will have mask breaks, when they're taking those breaks, they'll be socially distanced. You know, they'll have more distance between them. Where they might take a break with a mask by keeping a shield on for a short period of time. Those kinds of things and those approaches, all of which we're working through with our health experts now. But you know, we've got the space that we have, and working to make the most out of every inch that's in there. We're also looking at what rooms can we repurpose. You know, now that we are traveling to the classroom, does that open up some other larger spaces that we can repurpose for classroom areas and things like that? So we're also taking a close look at the available spaces there, and we'll be repurposing those where it makes sense for our kids and gives them a little bit extra room. So again, back to the outdoors as well. You know, we'll be using the outdoors as much as we can, as long as the weather is favorable for that. And you know, it's this layering of strategies that we use. So we recognize sometimes we go into rooms and they seem really small. When we get everything moved out of there, they feel quite a bit different. And we will be, you know, sort of maximizing our approach with furniture, what have you. We do have some physical barriers that we'll use for some collaborative work some other times. We're looking at things maybe in the cafeteria, obviously, and as I'm often reminded when I try, you can't eat with a mask on. So we're looking in the cafeterias around, you know, what's that distancing look like and how can we best do that? So we are using physical barriers, but creating a barrier around each and every child, again, for a variety of reasons, we don't believe that that's the healthiest, best, or advisable way to go.
And to follow up on the live stream, the teacher has control of the camera. And so the teacher will face the camera toward what the main focus of the lesson would be. So it could be the teacher, it could be the smartboard. The kids will also learn that they'll be able to access the smartboard right through the software that they're using. So Zoom or Google Meet, whichever software we go with, would allow the kids to actually pull up the smart notebook software, and they'll actually be able to see the smart notebook, the smartboard, very clear on their screen. And so we do believe that that would be helpful for the students. There's questions in regards to band, and hot off the press right before we went into the webinar, there was information that came from the state regarding all of the music programs. So at this point, I would like to read through them a little bit more thoroughly before I respond. But the original intention was that there was not going to be singing or playing of instruments at school, but we need to go back and review the new state guidelines that have come out. But we're fully prepared. We've been doing a lot of work this summer from a curriculum perspective, and there's a lot of things that teachers can teach students about playing their instruments without actually playing the instrument, as far as fingering and beats, and we can do flipped classrooms for kids and be able to give them those experiences.
Yep, to their credit, I just want to share that that's something that our music teachers really learned so much about in the spring. You know, how can they flip it, have students record their performances, send them in, and have them give them feedback based on the recording. They learned a lot. So figure it out, as everything else.
Great. Trying to scroll through.
You're a great facilitator, Dr. Cranty. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lutzy. I'm getting the hang of it. What is this, our you know, 6th webinar?
We've done a few.
8th, 9th?
Dr. Parenti, maybe I can.
Oh, yes, Bill. Mr.
In general about special education.
Helpful. Thank you.
You know, when students return to school in the fall, they will have their IEPs implemented fully. So they will receive all the services that are written into the IEPs that they have now. We are going to try and deliver those services on the cohorts as much as possible. When there are instances where we have to go across cohorts, we'll be looking for larger spaces in the building to provide additional social distancing opportunities to be able to you know, reduce the contact of students across cohorts. But the IEPs will be implemented fully. So if they have OT, PT, counseling, whatever might be on a particular IEP, you know, the students will be receiving those services as written in the IEP. And within probably 4, 6, 8 weeks of school, you know, PPTs will be held to, if you haven't had an annual review during the closure period, we'll be holding IEP meetings or PPT meetings to evaluate the students' current performance. We want to give it a few weeks into the school year so that we can get a true idea of how the student is performing. And then the PPT team will meet, get together, talk about where the student is and what changes that may or may not need to be made into the student's program.
Great. There's several questions that have come up about world language. We're still working through all the details of world language, but our students will still have the opportunity to participate in the 4 languages that Saxe offers. And there may be a little different structure that we're using this year to make it a little bit more fluid for students. And so we're working through all of those details in regards to world language. There's a lot of questions about the meet and greet and the opportunity to meet their teachers without face masks and to see their classmates without face masks. And also, if a parent chooses to opt their child out of school, is there a possibility for them to still meet their teacher? So I'm not sure if there's a Saxe administrator that would like to respond to that.
Well, I would say, as we always have meet and greet in 5th grade, and we definitely want to continue that tradition. We're going to look for some guidance on whether we can do that outside, which would be wonderful, with using our tents and some of that, so we can get some face-to-face interaction, because the 4th graders didn't get a chance to even step foot in Saxe last spring, which was hard for all of us. So we're hoping that we can do something like that. At least we will do something remotely, I can say that. But I would love to be able to do something in person if we could do some kind of staggered meet and greet, so we don't have 330 families showing up at once. So we're working on that. It's a great part of our tradition we want to continue. So thanks.
So there are several questions that haven't been answered quite yet, but we're at the 4:35. So we can do what we did with the other 2 sessions, where we actually do a cut and paste of all of these questions, and we're going to start doing frequently asked questions and be able to answer them and post them up onto the website for everyone.
Great. Great. Well, Dr. Krenti, thank you. Everyone, all of our panelists, thank you for being here again. There's a lot of information, and we did try to, a lot of the questions that are being asked, at least many of them, we tried to answer them in the guide itself too, but we will work through and put together an FAQ and keep that evolving. Of course, you're always welcome to reach out as well, and we'll do our best to get back. As you can imagine, the avalanche of emails hasn't slowed this summer. If anything, it's accelerated, but we will do our very best to get back to you as quickly as we can. We're grateful. We were at one point well over 330 or so attendees, and we know this is important. We're committed to staying on top of all of the information and everything we can do and making well-informed decisions and communicating those decisions to you as quickly as possible. So again, I want to encourage you to go back to the website, use that as a resource. That's what it's there for, and we all look forward to the day we no longer need it. So thank you. Stay healthy. Enjoy the rest of the summer, and stay tuned for a survey next week. Please answer it quickly. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. I'm going to stop recording.